Picture this: Kensington Gardens, London, 1897. Late afternoon, golden light cutting through elm trees, children playing on the grass, and a man sitting on a bench, watching. He's small, strangely small, barely over 5 feet tall, narrow shoulders, delicate hands that look like they belong to a boy, not a man pushing 40. He has a thin mustache he keeps touching. Large, dark eyes that look permanently sad. The kind of sad that goes bone deep. His name is James Matthew Barrie. He's already famous. Successful playwright, wealthy, invited to all the best parties in London. He has a wife at home, Mary, beautiful actress. They married 3 years ago, but they sleep in separate bedrooms. They barely touch. There are whispers. Have been since the wedding. Something is wrong with their marriage. Mary will later confirm it, after she leaves him for another man. Their wedding night was a disaster, she'll tell friends. Barrie seemed confused, frightened, unable to understand what was expected of him. In all their years of marriage, they were never intimate. Not once. But here in the gardens, none of that matters. Here he can do what he loves most. Watch children. He has a St. Bernard with him. Massive dog named Porthos. The dog is his passport, his excuse, his way in. Children love dogs. They approach without fear. They talk to the man holding the leash. And Barrie talks back. He's awkward with adults, painfully shy at dinner parties. Can't make conversation with people his own age. But with children, he transforms. The stiffness melts. The sadness lifts slightly. He does magic tricks, makes coins appear from behind their ears, produces sweets from empty pockets. He tells stories, wild adventures about fairies and pirates and boys who can fly. He gets down on his knees in the grass, plays their games, not as an adult humoring children, as a genuine participant, fully immersed in the make-believe. This is where he's comfortable. This is where he belongs. Not in the adult world of marriage and society and expectation, but here, in the realm of childhood, where the rules are different and imagination is more real than reality. Today, he's watching 5 boys, brothers, playing pirates. One has a wooden sword, another is climbing a tree. The nursemaid sits nearby, reading, only half watching. Barrie watches completely. There's something hungry in his gaze. Not predatory, nothing sexual. Every account insists on this. His interest was emotional, psychological, almost spiritual, but hungry nonetheless. Like a man dying of thirst, watching water just out of reach. He wants something these children have, something he lost or never had, or can never have again. The boy's mother arrives to collect them. She's beautiful, dark hair, graceful, warm smile. Her name is Sylvia Llewellyn Davies. The boys run to her, George, Jack, Peter. And soon there will be Michael and Nico too. 5 boys in all, 5 lost boys. Barrie stands, tips his hat, introduces himself. He's charming when he wants something badly enough. He makes the children laugh. Compliments Sylvia on her sons, mentions casually that he's a writer, looking for inspiration. Sylvia is flattered. Her husband Arthur is a struggling barrister, always short of money. To have a famous playwright paying attention to her family feels like luck. She doesn't know what this moment will set in motion. A story that will conquer the world. A story about a boy who never grows up. A story performed 10,000 times, adapted by Disney, translated into every language. A story that will become synonymous with childhood itself. She doesn't know the story will also destroy her family, that George will die in the trenches of World War I, that Michael will drown under mysterious circumstances with his arms around another young man, that Peter will call it that terrible masterpiece and throw himself under a train. She doesn't know that Peter Pan isn't a fantasy Barrie will create. It's a ghost story he's been carrying since he was 6 years old, since the day his brother fell through the ice and never came home. All she knows is this strange little man seems kind, seems interested. She invites him to tea. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My grandmother said I wouldn't even reach 100 subscribers in my channel, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me prove to her that these tales matter. Please subscribe to the Midnight Tales, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Now, let's continue to the story. You know Peter Pan, right? Everyone knows Peter Pan, the boy who can fly, the magical island called Neverland, Tinkerbell and her pixie dust, Captain Hook and the ticking crocodile. Second star to the right and straight on till morning. It's one of the most beloved children's stories ever written. Disney made it a classic. It's been performed on stages around the world more than almost any play except Shakespeare. It's shorthand for the magic of childhood, for imagination, for refusing to let go of wonder. That's the version we give to children, the safe version. Tonight, I'm going to tell you the real story. Peter Pan wasn't born from whimsy. It was born from grief. From a 6-year-old boy trying to resurrect his dead brother. From a man who never fully became an adult. From a man who attached himself to other people's children with an intensity that unsettled everyone who witnessed it. From a family that was consumed by his obsession and paid for it with their lives. The boy who never grows up isn't a celebration of eternal childhood. He's a memorial to a child who died. And when you understand that, when you see what J.M. Barrie actually wrote, not the Disney version, but the real text, Peter Pan transforms from a fantasy into something much darker. A story about death, about the impossibility of holding on to the people we love, about what it costs to stay young forever. Tonight, we follow the thread from a frozen pond in Scotland in 1867 to a London Underground station in 1960. Along that thread, a grieving mother who taught her son that death was a gift. A strange little man who collected other people's children, a play that conquered the world, and a curse that no one escaped. We'll watch a boy fall through ice and freeze forever in his mother's memory. We'll see his younger brother try to become him, wearing his clothes, mimicking his voice, desperate for a mother's love that was buried with her favorite son. We'll meet the family Barrie adopted as his own, the 5 Llewellyn Davies boys, and watch as he wrapped himself around their lives until they couldn't tell where his fantasy ended and their reality began. We'll read what Peter Pan actually says, not the Disney version, the original text, and discover a story haunted by death, by loss, by the terrible cost of never growing up. And we'll follow the real lost boys to their ends, the trenches, the drowning pool, the train tracks. We'll see what happens when a man's grief becomes a story, and that story becomes a curse. This is the true story of Peter Pan. Welcome to the Midnight Tales. To understand Peter Pan, you have to start with a death, not a fictional death, a real one. The death that created everything that followed. Immature, Scotland, January 1867. It's a small town, a weaving community in the eastern lowlands. Grey stone houses with slate roofs, narrow streets, Presbyterian churches where ministers preach about sin and damnation. Cold winters that freeze the locks solid, or so it seems. The Barrie family lives here. David Barrie Sr. is a hand loom weaver. Quiet, hard-working man who keeps his head down. His wife Margaret Ogilvy is the fire in the household. Passionate, literary, devoted to her children with an intensity that borders on possession. She reads constantly, tells stories beautifully, fills the house with language and imagination. They have 10 children, infant mortality has touched them like it touches almost every family in this era. But enough have survived to fill their small home with noise and need. Margaret has a favourite. Everyone knows it. His name is David. He's 13 years old, the golden child, the shining one. He's bright and athletic, good at school, popular with the other children. He's going to be a minister when he grows up. Margaret has decided he's going to do great things, be someone important, someone who matters. He's everything Margaret dreamed her son would be. And then there's James, 6 years younger than David, small for his age, often sickly, unremarkable in every way that David is remarkable. He watches his older brother with a mixture of adoration and envy he's too young to understand. David is the sun. James is a small planet orbiting in his light, too far away to feel warm. January 29th, 1867. The day before David's 14th birthday. It's cold, bitter, bone-deep Scottish cold. But the ice on the local loch is thick enough for skating, or so the boys believe. David goes out with a friend, probably to practice for the next day when the whole family will celebrate his birthday. Margaret has been planning a party. There will be cake, presents, celebration of her golden boy. We don't know exactly what happened on that frozen water, whether the ice cracked unexpectedly beneath David's weight, whether he skated over a thin patch that looked solid but wasn't, whether he fell and couldn't get up, or went through and couldn't claw his way back out, his fingers scrabbling against ice that kept breaking, kept giving way, kept plunging him back into the killing cold. What we know is they pulled his body from the water. What we know is David Barrie, 13 years old, 1 day short of his 14th birthday, was dead. The news reached Margaret Ogilvy at home. What happened next would shape James Barrie's entire life, would echo through everything he ever wrote, would create Peter Pan. Margaret collapsed, not just emotionally, physically. She took to her bed in a darkened room and refused to leave. Drew the curtains against the winter light. Wouldn't eat. Wouldn't speak to anyone except to call for David. Wouldn't acknowledge the other children who still needed their mother, who were grieving too, who stood outside her door and heard her weeping for a son who would never answer. The other 9 children became ghosts to her. Background noise, obstacles between her and her grief. She wanted only David, only her dead son. For days she lay in that dark room calling his name, crying out for a boy who would never come. The other children crept past her door. The household fell into a strange, suspended state, everyone waiting for something that couldn't happen, for Margaret to emerge, for life to resume. 6-year-old James didn't understand. He'd lost his brother. That was terrible, confusing, a rupture in the fabric of his small world. But he'd also lost his mother. She was there, physically present in the house, but she'd gone somewhere he couldn't follow, into a grief so total it had no room for the living. He wanted to help, wanted to bring her back, wanted to make her look at him the way she'd looked at David. So he did something that reads, from our distance, as one of the saddest things a child has ever done. He put on David's clothes, the suit David had worn, the cap David had worn, the shoes too big for his small feet. He dressed himself as his dead brother and walked into his mother's darkened room. He stood at the foot of her bed, this small boy in clothes too big for him, trying to be someone else, trying to bring back the dead through the sheer force of wanting it. And, for a moment, Margaret would later tell this story herself, would tell it proudly, as if it were beautiful rather than devastating. She thought David had come back to her, her dead son, returned, a miracle, a resurrection. Then her eyes adjusted to the dim light. She saw it was only James. But something had shifted. The door had opened a crack. For just that instant, James had succeeded. He'd brought David back. Or close enough. He'd made his mother see her dead son in her living one. He'd found a way in. From that day forward, James Barrie learned how to be his dead brother. He learned David's mannerisms, the way David walked, the way David talked, the particular phrases David used. When Margaret told stories about David, and she told them constantly, obsessively, keeping her dead son alive through narrative, James memorized every detail. He could recite David's favorite sayings, recall David's opinions on matters he'd never witnessed David discuss, describe David's ambitions as if they were his own. He became a replacement, a stand-in, a living memorial to the brother who died. A ghost wearing the flesh of the living. Margaret encouraged it. She dressed James in David's clothes until he outgrew them. She told him again and again what David would have done in any situation. What David would have said. What David would have become if he'd lived. She measured James constantly against this impossible standard. A dead boy who would never fail, never disappoint, never be anything less than perfect, because he would never have the chance to be imperfect. The message was clear, even to a child. David was the son who mattered. David was the one she loved. James was acceptable only insofar as he could channel David's ghost. James Barrie would spend the rest of his life trying to be good enough, trying to earn a love that was buried in a frozen grave, trying to become the boy who died. But there was something else, Margaret said, something she repeated often in those dark years of mourning. Something that planted a seed in James's mind that would grow into Peter Pan. She told him that when she felt the grief most sharply, when the loss threatened to crush her entirely, she comforted herself with one thought. David would remain a boy forever. He would never grow old, never grow tired or sick or disappointed with life, never fail at a career or make a bad marriage or become ordinary. He was frozen at 13, perfect and eternal. Death had preserved him in a way that life never could. He will always be a boy, she told James, and that is beautiful. This is the first whisper of Peter Pan, the idea that death is a kind of gift, that not growing up isn't a tragedy, it's a preservation, that to die young is to escape the disappointments of adult life. The compromises, the slow decay of hope into resignation. James Barrie absorbed this lesson from his grieving mother. He carried it with him for the rest of his life. It became the foundation of everything he believed about childhood, about death, about what it meant to grow up or refuse to. And eventually he wrote a story about it. A story about a boy who never grows up, who can't grow up, who is frozen forever in childhood. Just like David Barrie, who fell through the ice and never turned 14. To die will be an awfully big adventure. Margaret Ogilvy taught her son that. She just didn't know she was writing the most famous line in children's literature. James grew up, after a fashion, but only after a fashion. Physically, he barely grew at all. He reached 5'3" and stopped, as if his body had decided to honor his mother's worship of eternal boyhood. His voice never fully deepened. It retained a higher pitch than other men's, a boyish quality that people commented on throughout his life. He never developed a full beard. His frame remained slight, almost delicate. Some biographers have suggested he never went through complete puberty, that there was something medically wrong with him, some hormonal deficiency that kept him childlike in body as well as spirit. Whether this was true or whether his stunted development was psychosomatic, a physical manifestation of his mother's teaching that to grow up was to fail, no one can say for certain. What's clear is that James Barrie never became a man in the conventional sense. He remained something else, something in between, a boy who had grown old without ever growing up. He went to school, then to Edinburgh University. He was brilliant, genuinely brilliant, with a gift for language and storytelling that couldn't be denied. He became a journalist, then a novelist, then a playwright. His work was successful, then very successful, then phenomenally successful. By his 30s, he was one of the most celebrated writers in Britain. Wealthy, famous, invited everywhere. In 1894, he married Mary Ansell, a beautiful young actress. It should have been the beginning of a normal adult life. The culmination of his success. Proof that he had grown up after all. It wasn't. The marriage was, by all accounts, a disaster from the wedding night onward. Mary later told friends, after she'd left him, after she had no reason to protect his reputation, that Barrie seemed bewildered by the physical expectations of marriage, that he was frightened of intimacy, that their wedding night ended in confusion and tears and a distance that never closed. They slept in separate bedrooms from early in the marriage. There were no children, never any possibility of children. Mary was young and beautiful and trapped in a marriage that gave her a famous husband and a comfortable life, but nothing else. No passion, no intimacy, no partnership of any meaningful kind. Barrie was kind to her in his way, generous with money, attentive to her comfort. But he was never really present. His mind was always elsewhere, with his writing, with his imaginings, with children who weren't his and couldn't be his. The marriage limped along for 15 years, growing hollower with each passing season. Mary began an affair with a younger man, a writer named Gilbert Cannon. When Barrie discovered it, he was devastated. Not because he loved Mary romantically, but because he couldn't bear to fail, couldn't bear the public scandal, couldn't bear to be seen as the kind of man whose wife would leave him. They divorced in 1909. Mary married Cannon. Barrie was left alone, famous and wealthy and utterly isolated, incapable of the connections that made other people's lives meaningful. But the marriage's failure wasn't really a surprise, because by the time Mary left him, Barrie had already found something else to fill the void. Someone else, or rather, some others. Throughout his adult life, Barrie attached himself to families with young children. The Llewellyn Davies boys were the most famous, the most documented, but they weren't the first. Before them, there had been other families, other children, other objects of his intense and peculiar devotion. He would befriend the parents, charm them with his fame, his wealth, his seemingly endless generosity. He would become indispensable to the household, and then gradually his focus would shift to the children. He would play with them for hours, tell them stories, photograph them obsessively, write about them, make them the center of his imaginative world. There was never any evidence of sexual abuse. Everyone who knew Barrie, including the Llewellyn Davies boys themselves as adults, insisted that his interest was not predatory in that sense. He didn't want to molest children. He wanted to be a child, wanted to enter their world, live in their imagination, escape the prison of adult life that he'd never successfully inhabited anyway. But there was something else too, something possessive, something that made the parents of these children, the fathers especially, uneasy. He seemed to want to own these families, to insert himself into their lives so completely that they couldn't imagine existing without him. Arthur Llewellyn Davies saw it immediately. He tolerated Barrie's presence because his wife enjoyed the attention, because the children adored him, because the financial help was genuinely needed. But he never trusted the little man with the sad eyes. He was right not to. By 1897, when he met the Llewellyn Davies family, Barrie had perfected his method. He walked Porthos in Kensington Gardens almost daily. The dog was enormous, friendly, a magnet for children. They would approach to pet him, and Barrie would engage them in conversation. Magic tricks, stories, games of make-believe that lasted for hours. The parents would see their children playing happily with a well-dressed gentleman and his dog. If they inquired, they'd learn he was J.M. Barrie, the famous playwright. How wonderful that he'd taken an interest in their children. And Barrie would watch, would learn the family's routines, would arrange to be in the right place at the right time, would make himself useful, then necessary, then indispensable. The Llewellyn Davies boys were his masterpiece. George, Jack, Peter, Michael, Nico. 5 boys, 5 lost boys. Though they didn't have that name yet. A complete set, a family he could make his own. He watched them that first afternoon in the gardens, and he knew these were the ones. These would be his. He just had to find a way in. Arthur and Sylvia Llewellyn Davies were, by all accounts, a golden couple. Arthur was tall, handsome, brilliant, a barrister with a first-class mind and a first-class education. He'd been at Eton, then Cambridge. He was charming, well-liked, destined for great things. Except the great things never quite arrived. His law practice struggled. Cases didn't come. Money was always tight. The beautiful couple lived in increasingly cramped circumstances, their lifestyle shrinking even as their family grew. Sylvia was the daughter of George Moria, the famous Punch cartoonist and author. She'd grown up in artistic circles, surrounded by wit and creativity and people who made beautiful things. She was beautiful herself. Dark hair, luminous eyes, a grace that made people stop and watch her cross a room. They loved each other. That was never in question. Their marriage was everything Barrie's wasn't. Passionate, intimate, real. They had 5 sons in rapid succession. George in 1893, Jack in 1894, Peter in 1897, Michael in 1900, Nico in 1903. But love doesn't pay rent. And by the time Barrie found them, the Davies family was stretched thin. Too many boys, too little income, a brilliant husband whose brilliance somehow never translated into success. They were vulnerable. And Barrie knew how to exploit vulnerability. He approached the children first. That was always his method. Win the children and the parents follow. George and Jack were old enough to be enchanted by magic tricks, by stories, by a grown-up who took their games seriously. Barrie spent hours with them in the gardens, crawling through bushes as if they were jungles, turning park benches into pirate ships, making the ordinary world into something magical. Then he introduced himself to Sylvia. He was famous. She would have known his name. He was charming, attentive, interested in her children in a way that flattered her. He mentioned that he lived nearby, that he often walked in the gardens, that he'd love to continue seeing the boys. He invited himself to dinner, once, then again, then regularly. He became a fixture at their table, eating their food, drinking their wine, entertaining their children while Arthur watched with growing unease. Barrie paid for things, school fees, medical bills, a holiday the family couldn't otherwise afford. He was so generous, so seemingly selfless. How could they refuse? And all the while he was taking notes, mental notes at first, then written ones. The games the boys played, the things they said, the way they moved through the world, full of imagination and energy and the absolute conviction that make-believe was real. He was gathering material, These boys were becoming his raw material. In 1901, Barrie produced something remarkable. He'd taken the Davies boys on a summer holiday to his country house. For weeks they played elaborate games, pirates and shipwrecks and desert islands. Barrie photographed everything, staged scenes, created a narrative. Then he had it printed as a book. The Boy Castaways of Black Lake Island, complete with photographs, captions, a mock-serious scholarly tone. It looked like a real expedition account, except the explorers were children and the adventures were make-believe. Only 2 copies were made, one for the family, one for Barrie. Arthur Llewellyn Davies lost his copy on a train almost immediately, perhaps carelessly, perhaps deliberately. He never seemed particularly upset about the loss. But the book revealed something important about Barrie's intentions. He wasn't just playing with these children, he was documenting them, turning them into characters, claiming their stories as his own. The Davies boys were becoming lost boys, whether they knew it or not. Arthur never trusted Barrie. That much is clear from every account. He tolerated him for Sylvia's sake, for the boys' sake, for the money that was always so desperately needed. But he never liked him, never welcomed him into the family the way Sylvia did. He called Barrie the little man, with barely concealed contempt, complained about his constant presence, felt, without being able to articulate exactly why, that something was wrong. Then Arthur got sick. The cancer started in his jaw. Sarcoma, aggressive, malignant, incurable with the medicine of that era. By the time it was diagnosed, it had already spread. Arthur Llewellyn Davies spent the last months of his life watching his own face be consumed. The tumor grew until it was visible from the outside, distorting his handsome features, making it difficult to eat or speak or be seen in public. It was an ugly death, slow and agonizing and humiliating. He died in April 1907. He was 44 years old. Barrie was at his bedside at the end, comforting Sylvia, promising to take care of the boys. Arthur's death left Sylvia a widow with 5 sons and very little money. Barrie stepped in immediately, paid all the bills, covered all the school fees, moved himself even more firmly into the center of their lives. He was, for all practical purposes, the father of the family now. He had won. And then Sylvia got sick too. Cancer, perhaps triggered by grief, perhaps by the exhaustion of raising 5 boys alone, perhaps by nothing more than the cruel randomness of disease. By 1910, she was dying, and everyone knew it. She grew weaker month by month. The beautiful woman who had captivated everyone who met her faded into a shadow of herself. The boys watched. Their mother disappeared just as they'd watched their father disappear 3 years earlier. Before she died, Sylvia wrote a will. She wanted her boys raised by her family, by her mother, by her brother Guy, by people who shared her blood. She wrote down her wishes clearly. The boys should go to Jenny, her mother's nickname. She did not want J.M. Barrie raising her sons. She died in August 1910. And when the will was read, something strange had happened. The handwriting was ambiguous in one crucial place. The name Jenny had been altered, a stroke added here, a letter changed there, until it could be read as Jimmy, Barrie's nickname. Did Barrie forge the will? There's no definitive proof. The evidence is circumstantial but damning. The alterations were in different ink than the rest of the document. The changes seem deliberate, not the kind of accidental mark that happens naturally, but specific modifications to specific letters. And Barrie had both motive and opportunity. He was constantly at Sylvia's side during her final illness. He had access to her papers. He wanted those boys more than he had ever wanted anything. Sylvia's family suspected foul play. There were whispered accusations, threats of legal action. But proving forgery was difficult. And fighting a lawsuit against the famous, wealthy J.M. Barrie was expensive and risky. In the end, the family backed down. Barrie got what he wanted. George was 17. Jack was 16. Peter was 13. Michael was 10. Nico was 7. Their father was dead. Their mother was dead. And they now belonged to the strange little man who had been circling their family since before most of them were born. The lost boys had been truly lost. Their parents were gone. And in their place stood a man who had made them famous without their consent, who had turned their childhood into someone else's intellectual property. Whether they wanted him or not, J.M. Barrie was their father now. Before we see what happened to these boys, we need to understand what Barrie actually wrote. Not the Disney version, the real text, the play and the novel, with all the darkness intact. Most people know Peter Pan from the 1953 Disney film or from stage productions that have smoothed away the rough edges over a century of performance. These versions are charming, colourful, safe. Peter is a plucky hero. Neverland is a magical wonderland. Everything works out in the end. That's not what Barrie wrote. Barrie's Peter Pan is strange, unsettling, shot through with a melancholy that borders on despair. It's a story about death dressed up as a story about eternal life. A ghost story pretending to be a fairy tale. The play premiered in 1904, 6 years before Sylvia's death, when the lost boys were still children and their parents were still alive. It was an immediate sensation, the most successful play in London that year. But the play was only the beginning. In 1906, Barrie published Peter Pan, stunted, Kensington Gardens, a novella that gave Peter an origin story rooted in infant death. In 1911, he published Peter and Wendy, a full novel that expanded the story and made explicit many things the play had only implied. Each version is darker than the last. The novel is the fullest and the strangest. Let me show you what it actually says. In the novel, we learn how Peter became what he is. When Peter was 7 days old, just a week old, barely alive, he heard his parents discussing what he would become when he grew up. A lawyer, perhaps, or a businessman, an office clerk or a shopkeeper, an adult with adult concerns, adult disappointments, adult compromises. Peter didn't want that. He didn't want to grow up and become ordinary. So he ran away, flew out the window, and went to Kensington Gardens to live among the fairies. He stayed there for years, forgetting he was ever human, forgetting he had a mother who loved him, forgetting everything about the life he'd left behind. One day, he decided to go back. He flew to his old house, found his old window. He wanted to return to his mother, wanted to be her child again, wanted to undo what he'd done and start over. But the window was barred, locked. And when he looked through the glass, he saw his mother sitting in a chair, holding a baby, a new baby, a replacement. She had forgotten him, moved on, found another child to love. Peter flew away, heartbroken. He returned to Neverland and forgot that he had ever been sad, forgot his mother, forgot his home, forgot everything. This is the first horror of Peter Pan. Peter's eternal youth isn't freedom, it's damage. He can't form lasting memories, can't maintain attachments, can't hold on to anything. Not love, not friendship, not even grief. He forgets the children he brings to Neverland, forgets the adventures he has, forgets everything except the immediate moment. He's not a magical boy living his best life. He's a broken thing, frozen in time. Unable to grow or change or connect. Unable to be human in any meaningful sense. Now consider who the lost boys actually are. In the novel, Barrie tells us explicitly, the lost boys are the children who fall out of their pram when the nurse is looking the other way. And if they are not claimed in 7 days, they are sent far away to the Neverland. Read that carefully. Children who fall out of their pram and aren't claimed. What is Barrie actually describing? Infant mortality. Babies who die before they can be christened. Children who slip away while no one is watching. The euphemism is thin enough to see through if you're willing to look. The lost boys aren't runaways. They're dead children, souls who never got the chance to grow up. They're in Neverland because Neverland is where you go when you die, too young to go anywhere else. Peter Pan doesn't rescue them. He collects them. He's a psychopomp, a guide of souls. Like Charon ferrying the dead across Styx, or Anubis weighing hearts in the Egyptian underworld. He takes children who have died and brings them to a place where they'll be children forever. Because that's what death does. It freezes you in time. It makes you eternal. David Barrie fell through the ice at 13 and never grew up. The Lost Boys fall out of their pram and never grow up either. The mechanism is the same. Only the poetry is different. The most famous line in Peter Pan is also the most revealing. Peter has been captured by Captain Hook. He's trapped on a rock as the tide rises, about to drown or walk the plank. Depending on the version, it seems like the end. Death is coming. And Peter says, to die will be an awfully big adventure. In the context of the play, it sounds brave, defiant, a child hero facing death without fear. But think about what it actually means. Peter doesn't distinguish between death and adventure. To him, they're the same thing. Dying is just another experience. No, different from fighting pirates or flying to the stars. He doesn't fear death because he doesn't understand it. Doesn't understand that it's different from everything else, that it's final, that it's not a game. This is what Margaret Ogilvy taught her son in that darkened bedroom. That David's death was beautiful, that remaining a child forever was a gift. That not growing up was better than growing old and failing and disappointing everyone who believed in you. Barrie put his mother's grief into Peter's mouth. The comfort she took in a dead child became the philosophy of eternal childhood. To die will be an awfully big adventure. To never grow up is to never disappoint. To stay young forever, you just have to stop living. There's a detail in the novel that Disney left out entirely. 2 sentences that change everything. The Lost Boys, we're told, vary in number. Sometimes there are more of them, sometimes fewer. Barrie explains this. The boys on the island vary, of course, in numbers, according as they get killed and so on. They get killed, casually, regularly. It's just part of life in Neverland. Children die and new children arrive to replace them. Death is routine, unremarkable, just another thing that happens. But there's something worse. Another line easily missed if you're not looking for it. The boys on the island vary, of course, in numbers, according as they get killed and so on. And when they seem to be growing up, which is against the rules, Peter thins them out. Peter thins them out. When the lost boys start to grow up, when they begin to mature, to change, to become something other than eternal children, Peter does something about it. Barrie doesn't explain what thinning out means. He doesn't have to. The implication is clear. Peter kills the boys who start growing up. He has to. That's the rule of Neverland. Children stay children forever, or they don't stay at all. There's no room for adolescence, for maturity, for the slow process of becoming an adult. You stay young or you die, just like David Barrie, just like all the children who fall out of their pram and never come home. The story ends with one of the strangest passages in children's literature. Wendy grows up. She can't help it. That's what living children do. She gets older, becomes a woman, marries, has a daughter of her own named Jane. Peter comes back for her as he promised he would. He flies to her window, expecting to take her to Neverland for spring cleaning. Just like always, he's kept his promise, or rather, he's repeated the pattern, because he can't remember what promises are. But Wendy is old now. She's a mother. She can't fly anymore. She can't go with him. Peter doesn't understand. He looks at this woman and doesn't recognize her. Doesn't remember the adventures they had. Doesn't know who she is. This stranger in Wendy's room. "I can't come," Wendy tells him. "I have forgotten how to fly." "I'll teach you," Peter says. "I can't. I'm grown up. I'm too old." Peter stares at her. He doesn't understand what old means. Doesn't understand why she would choose this. Wrinkles and responsibility and the slow march toward death. Over Neverland. Over him. So he takes her daughter instead. Jane flies away to be Peter's new mother, to clean his house and tell him stories. And when Jane grows up, he takes her daughter, and on and on. Generation after generation. The final lines of the novel. When Margaret grows up, she will have a daughter who is to be Peter's mother in turn. And thus, it will go on, so long as children are gay and innocent and heartless. Gay and innocent and heartless. That's how Barrie describes children. Not sweet, not pure, heartless. Children are cruel, Barrie understood, selfish, incapable of real attachment. They forget the people who love them. They move on without looking back. They are, in their way, little monsters. Peter Pan is the ultimate child, and therefore the ultimate monster. He can't love, can't remember, can't connect. He uses people up and throws them away, and he doesn't even know he's doing it, because he can't hold on to anything long enough to understand what he's lost. One more darkness worth noting. From the very first production in 1904, Peter Pan has been played by a woman. Not occasionally, almost always. It's a theatrical tradition that has lasted over a century. Why? The practical answer is that Peter needs to fly, and in 1904, the wire work was easier with a lighter performer. Women weighed less, could be lifted more safely. But there's another answer. A boy playing Peter would grow up. His voice would change. His body would mature. Within a year or two, he'd be visibly wrong for the part. A woman playing Peter can play him forever. She can be eternal in a way no actual boy can be. She can embody the impossible promise of the story. Childhood without end, preserved against time. Every actress who has played Peter Pan has enacted a kind of trick on the audience. We're watching a grown woman pretend to be a boy who will never grow up. The illusion works because we want it to work. Because we want to believe that eternal childhood is possible. Even as the proof that it isn't stands right in front of us. The tradition continues today. And every time a woman flies across the stage as Peter, she's participating in Barrie's ghost story. Playing a dead boy who doesn't know he's dead. Pretending for a few hours that time can be stopped and childhood can last forever. It can't. Barrie knew that better than anyone. Now we return to the real lost boys. The 5 Llewellyn Davies brothers who grew up in Barrie's shadow, who could never escape the story he'd wrapped around them like a shroud. George, the eldest, was the golden boy. Handsome, kind, brave, athletic. Everything David Barrie had been. Everything Barrie himself could never be. He'd grown up being photographed, being documented, being turned into raw material for someone else's art. But he'd come through it remarkably well adjusted, considering. He went to Eton, then to Cambridge. He made friends easily. He seemed destined for success, for happiness, for the normal adult life that had eluded his strange guardian. When World War I began in 1914, George enlisted immediately. Of course he did. That's what young men of his class did. It was supposed to be a short war. Over by Christmas, everyone said so. It wasn't over by Christmas. It wasn't over by the next Christmas either. The war ground on, chewing up young men by the hundreds of thousands. The flower of a generation fed into the machinery of industrial slaughter. George became an officer. He was good at it, good at leading men, good at staying calm under fire, good at the terrible practical business of war. His letters home were cheerful, self-deprecating, deliberately light. He didn't want his family to worry. March 15th, 1915. George was leading his men through the trenches near Ypres in Belgium. The Germans had snipers positioned in the ruins of a church. One of them found George. The bullet killed him instantly. He was 21 years old. Barrie received the telegram at his flat in London. He wrote in his notebook in handwriting that shook, "They say I am the most miserable man in the world." Another golden boy dead too young, another child who would never grow up, the first of the lost boys to be lost for real. Michael was Barrie's favourite. That was never a secret. Barrie said so openly, wrote it down, made it clear to everyone, including the other boys. After George and Jack grew into young men, after they became too old to play the games Barrie loved, too old to be children in his presence, Michael became the centre of his obsession. His letters to Michael have survived. They're intense, possessive, adoring. They read less like letters from a guardian to a ward and more like something else entirely. "I wish I could be with you always," Barrie wrote. "You're the only one who has ever really understood me." Michael was beautiful in a way that drew attention. Dark eyes, delicate features, an almost feminine prettiness that people remarked on throughout his life. He was sensitive, artistic, intelligent. He painted. He wrote poetry. He seemed to feel things more deeply than other people. As if his skin were thinner than normal. He was also troubled. He had terrible nightmares. Would wake screaming, drenched in sweat, unable to explain what he'd seen. He was anxious, prone to dark moods, uncertain of his place in the world. He struggled at school, struggled to fit in, struggled with something inside himself that he couldn't name. At Oxford, Michael formed an intense friendship with a young man named Rupert Buxton. The nature of their relationship has been debated for a century. Were they lovers? In 1921, homosexuality was a crime in England, punishable by imprisonment, social destruction, complete ruin. If Michael and Rupert were together in that way, they would have had to hide it, would have had to speak in codes, meet in secret, never acknowledge what they were to each other. What we know is that they were inseparable. They spent every possible moment together. They wrote letters to each other when apart that were, by any standard, love letters. Tender, longing, full of a need that couldn't quite speak its name. Barrie noticed the intensity of the friendship. In his letters to Michael during this period, there's a new note of anxiety, of jealousy perhaps. Michael had someone else now, someone his own age, someone who wasn't a strange little man old enough to be his grandfather. Michael was 20 years old. He was growing up, finding his own life, becoming someone independent of the story that had been wrapped around him since birth, May 19th, 1921. Michael and Rupert went swimming at Sandford Pool, a spot on the Thames near Oxford. It was a beautiful day. Other students were there, sunning themselves on the bank, enjoying the weather. Sandford Pool was known for its dangerous currents. Several people had drowned there over the years. Signs warned swimmers about the undertow. Michael and Rupert knew this. Everyone at Oxford knew it. Neither Michael nor Rupert could swim well. They went into the water anyway. Maybe they thought they'd stay in the shallows. Maybe they were showing off. Maybe they didn't care about the danger. Or maybe they knew exactly what they were doing. The currents took them. They struggled. Someone on the bank saw them go under, called for help, dove in to try to save them. Too late. When they pulled the bodies out, Michael and Rupert were found with their arms around each other, holding on to each other as they drowned, together in death as they had been in life. The inquest ruled it accidental death. There was no note, no evidence of planning, just two young men who couldn't swim, going into water they knew was dangerous, dying in each other's arms. Michael was 20 years old. Rupert was the same. Barrie learned of Michael's death the next day. A telegram. Cold words on paper. He was destroyed. Whatever had existed between them, paternal love, obsession, something more complicated, something that had no name. Michael's death broke something in Barrie that never healed. He'd lost George in the war, and that had been terrible. But George had been grown, had been a soldier, had died doing something he'd chosen to do. Michael was his. Michael was special. Michael was the boy he'd loved best in all the world. And now, Michael was dead, in the same way David had died, in the water, in the cold, pulled under and never coming back up. Michael was the boy I loved best in the whole world, Barrie wrote to a friend. And then later, in his diary, the words almost illegible. It is as if I had drowned with him. He never really recovered. He kept writing, kept producing plays, kept making money, kept being famous. But something was gone. The spark that had made Peter Pan possible. The ability to imagine eternal childhood as something beautiful. It had drowned with Michael in Sandford Pool. The boy who never grows up had been a fantasy. Now Barrie knew what it really meant to stay young forever. It meant dying. And then there was Peter. Not Peter Pan. Peter Llewellyn Davies. The boy whose name Barrie borrowed. The one who had to spend his entire life being confused with a fictional character. Barrie always insisted that Peter wasn't the primary inspiration for Peter Pan. The name was a coincidence, he said, or perhaps a small tribute to the infant he'd first seen in Kensington Gardens. The character was based more on the other boys, on George's bravery, on Michael's imagination. Peter himself wasn't convinced. From his earliest memories, he'd been associated with a story he hadn't asked to be part of. Everywhere he went, people made the connection. Peter, like Peter Pan. They expected him to be magical, childlike, eternal. They were disappointed to find an ordinary person who wanted only to be left alone. He grew up in Barrie's household, surrounded by the mythology of a play that bore his name. He saw his brothers die, George in the war, Michael in the pool. He watched Barrie mourn them, watched the strange little man grow older and sadder and more obsessed with death. Peter tried to build a normal life. He became a publisher, got married, had children of his own. He was successful, respected. By all external measures, a man who had overcome a strange childhood to become a functioning adult. But he couldn't escape. The play kept being performed. The name kept following him. Journalists wanted to interview him about Peter Pan. Acquaintances assumed he must have stories, must have insights, must somehow embody the eternal childhood that the character represented. He didn't. He was just a man growing older, watching his youth recede, becoming everything a Peter Pan wasn't, aging, tired, mortal. In his later years, Peter's bitterness became impossible to hide. When people asked about his childhood, about Barrie, about the play, his answers grew darker. He called Peter Pan that terrible masterpiece. He said the association had been a curse on his family. He wasn't wrong. George dead in the trenches. Michael drowned in the Thames. His parents dead before he reached adulthood. His childhood turned into entertainment without his consent. His name stolen and given to a character who represented everything he could never be. Peter began burning papers, letters from Barrie, family documents, photographs. He was trying to erase the archive, to destroy the evidence of their strange, intertwined history. He wanted to control the narrative, or at least to leave gaps in it where the most painful parts had been. But some things can't be burned away. Some stories are too big to destroy. April 5th, 1960. Peter Llewellyn Davies went to Sloane Square Underground Station in London. He was 63 years old, a grandfather, a successful publisher, a man who had, by any external measure, lived a full life. He threw himself in front of a train. The newspapers reported it as an accident. His family knew better. Peter had been struggling for years with depression, with the weight of the past, with the inability to escape a story that had never been his. He had finally found a way out of Neverland, the only way that ever really worked. Peter had spent his whole life being asked if he could fly. In the end, he chose to fall. Of the 5 Llewellyn Davies boys, only 2 survived into old age. Jack deliberately distanced himself from Barrie, from the story, from everything associated with their strange childhood. He rarely spoke about Peter Pan. He built a life that had nothing to do with Neverland, served in the Navy, married, raised children, died quietly in 1959. He escaped the curse through sheer determination to be ordinary. Nico, the youngest, was the only one who spoke kindly of Barrie in later years. He was too young when Barrie entered their lives to remember anything different. He insisted that Uncle Jim had been loving, that the relationship had been appropriate, that the darkness others saw was exaggerated or misunderstood. But even Nico admitted the truth when pressed. Uncle Jim was a very strange man, he said, and it was a very strange childhood. He died in 1980, the last of the Lost Boys, the last person who had known the real story from the inside. J.M. Barrie died in 1937, still famous, still wealthy, still desperately alone. He left the rights to Peter Pan to Great Ormond Street Hospital for Children, a generous gift that has funded pediatric care for nearly a century. It was perhaps the most straightforwardly good thing he ever did. This man, whose goodness was always tangled up with obsession and grief and need. The play continued to be performed after his death. The story continued to be told. And in 1953, Walt Disney decided to adapt it. Disney's Peter Pan is charming, colourful, safe. Peter is a plucky hero, brave and clever and fun. His inability to grow up is presented as freedom rather than damage. Neverland is a magical wonderland of adventure. Pirates and mermaids and Indians and a clock-watching crocodile that provides comic relief. Tinkerbell is adorable instead of murderous. The Lost Boys are cute kids having a good time instead of dead children trapped in eternal childhood. Captain Hook is funny rather than frightening. Everything difficult about the original has been sanded away. There's no hint in the Disney version that Peter might be collecting dead children. No suggestion that he thins out boys who start growing up. No moment where he forgets Wendy, fails to recognize her, loses her to the inevitable process of aging. The line about children being heartless is gone. The scene where Peter hears his mother has replaced him is gone. The melancholy that permeates every page of the original, the grief of a man who lost his brother at 13 and never stopped mourning, is completely absent. Peter's origin isn't mentioned at all. He just exists, magical and eternal. without explanation or cost. Wendy doesn't grow up at the end. The story concludes with her flying home from Neverland, restored to her family, the adventure over. But life continuing as normal. There's no flash forward to middle age, no daughters and granddaughters claimed in an endless cycle. The death is gone. And without the death, the meaning is gone. What remains is pure fantasy, a celebration of imagination and childhood and the power of believing. Why did we take a story about death and turn it into a story about magic? Because the truth is too painful. Barrie understood something that most of us can't bear to face. Childhood ends. Children grow up or they die. There's no third option. No Neverland where you can stay young forever while still being alive. The boy who never grows up isn't a fantasy we can achieve. It's a tragedy we can only witness. It's David Barrie frozen at 13 in a Scottish graveyard. It's Michael Llewellyn Davies drowned at 20 with his arms around another boy. It's every child who didn't get the chance to grow old. Peter Pan, in Barrie's telling, is not someone to envy. He's someone to pity. He's broken, stunted, incapable of the connections that make life meaningful. He gets eternal youth, but he pays for it with eternal loneliness. Disney gave us a different Peter, a Peter who's fun to be, whose life is an adventure, whose condition has no cost, a Peter we can aspire to rather than mourn. It's a lie, but it's a beautiful lie, and we've chosen to believe it for 70 years. Today, Peter Pan is everywhere. It's a Disney classic streaming on demand. It's a Broadway musical revived every few years with a new celebrity in the title role. It's a phrase we use, Peter Pan syndrome, to describe adults who refuse to grow up, who won't commit, who can't accept the responsibilities of adulthood. When we use that phrase, we usually mean it as criticism. There's something wrong with people who refuse to mature. They're stunted, immature, failing to reach their potential. But we've forgotten that this was always the horror, not the fantasy. Barrie wasn't celebrating Peter Pan. He was mourning him. He was showing us what happens when someone can't grow up. The loneliness, the forgetting, the endless repetition of the same patterns because growth is impossible. David Barrie couldn't grow up because he died. Peter Pan can't grow up because something essential in him is already dead. They're the same figure, really. The same grief wearing different masks. Every time we invoke Peter Pan as a symbol of freedom and imagination, we're participating in the erasure. We're forgetting the dead boy who started it all, forgetting the lost boys who really were lost, forgetting that the second star to the right leads somewhere you can never return from. Let me take you back to where we started. Kensington Gardens, an afternoon in 1897. A small man sits on a bench watching children play. He's already carrying a ghost, has been carrying it since he was 6 years old. His brother David, dead at 13. His mother's grief, her terrible comfort. He will never grow up. He watches the Llewellyn Davies boys and sees something he needs. Not the children themselves exactly, something they represent. A way back to childhood. A way to be David again. A way to live in the world of make-believe where death doesn't exist and boys can fly and everything lost can be found again. He doesn't know what it will cost. Doesn't know that he's about to write a story that will curse everyone it touches. Doesn't know about the trenches where George will die, the pool where Michael will drown, the train tracks where Peter will finally escape. All he knows is that he needs these children, needs their games, their laughter, their willingness to believe in impossible things. And he's going to take what he needs, whatever the price. J.M. Barrie spent his entire life trying to solve the problem of death. He couldn't bring David back, couldn't undo the accident on the ice. So he did the next best thing. He created a world where death and childhood were the same, where boys who died young became boys who lived forever, where the tragedy of a shortened life became the triumph of eternal youth. Peter Pan is his answer to mortality. If you can't grow up, you can't grow old. If you can't grow old, you can't die. If you can't die, you've won. But Barrie knew the cost of this victory, knew it in his bones, in his stunted body that never quite became adult, in his barren marriage and his obsessive attachments and his endless, desperate need for children who weren't his. To stay young forever, you have to give up everything that makes life meaningful. Memory, connection, love, growth. Peter Pan has eternal youth. But he's alone. He can't remember the children he's befriended, can't maintain relationships, can't feel loss because he can't feel anything deeply enough to lose. He's not alive in any way that matters. He's just not dead yet. The real Peter, Peter Llewellyn-Davies, understood this better than anyone. He spent 63 years living with that name. 63 years of people asking if he could fly. 63 years of being confused with a fictional character who represented everything he wasn't. Carefree, eternal, free of the weight of human connection. Peter Llewellyn-Davies had to grow up, had to deal with loss, his parents, his brothers, the suffocating attention of the man who'd stolen his childhood and turned it into entertainment. Had to become an adult in a world that wanted him to stay a child forever. He built a life, a family, a career. He did everything Peter Pan couldn't do. And then, at 63, he decided he was tired. The curse of Peter Pan isn't that you never grow up. It's that the world won't let you. It's being frozen in someone else's fantasy. Being told who you are by a story you didn't write. Being unable to escape the childhood that was taken from you and given back as fiction. Peter Llewellyn-Davies threw himself under a train because he couldn't find any other way out of Neverland. That's the real ending of this story. Not happily ever after. Not, and they all flew away to adventures. Just a man on a train platform, choosing to finally grow up, the only way left to him. So what do we do with Peter Pan now? We can't unwatch the Disney version, can't unhear You Can Fly, can't undo a century of cultural saturation that's turned this grief-haunted story into a celebration of eternal childhood. But we can remember. We can remember David Barrie, 13 years old, falling through the ice on the day before his birthday. We can remember his mother's grief, her terrible comfort. He will never grow up. We can remember the Llewellyn-Davies boys, the real lost boys, and what it cost them to be fodder for someone else's fantasy. George dead in the trenches, Michael drowned in the Thames, Peter under the wheels of a train. We can remember that to die will be an awfully big adventure isn't brave. It's broken. It's the philosophy of someone who can't tell the difference between living and dying, because he's never really done either. And we can remember that growing up isn't a betrayal of childhood. It's the point of childhood. It's what children are supposed to do. The ones who don't grow up are the ones who can't. The ones frozen by death or damage. The ones lost before they had a chance to be found. Peter Pan isn't a hero. He's a memorial, a headstone in the shape of a story. And every time we tell that story, we're visiting a grave. Did you know this history? Did you know about David Barrie, about the Llewellyn-Davies boys, about the real Peter who threw himself under a train? Let me know in the comments. And tell me this. Now that you know what Peter Pan is really about, can you ever see it the same way again? The second star to the right leads somewhere darker than we thought. And the boy who never grew up was never really a boy at all. He was a ghost. He was grief. He was a question that couldn't be answered. He was a brother dead at 13, preserved forever in a mother's broken heart. This has been The Midnight Tales. Try not to think about the boy at your window, waiting to take you somewhere you can never grow old. He's been waiting for a very long time.